According to updated lore, the Emperor didn't obliterate Horus's soul. That single sentence has ignited more comment section argument in Warhammer 40k spaces than almost anything else in recent memory, because it cuts directly against what most overview videos have been repeating for years without checking whether the Siege of Terra novel series materially changed the answer. The older canonical version of that ending is explicit. The Emperor and Horus meet on the bridge of the Vengeful Spirit in orbit above a dying Terra. The fight is catastrophic. The Emperor broken, mortally wounded, barely conscious. But before his body fails entirely, he summons whatever remains of his power and uses it to destroy Horus's soul outright. Not kill Horus, not banish him to the warp. Obliterate his essence, burn it from existence, so the Ruinous Powers couldn't claim what remained and resurrect him as a Daemon Prince. The psychic shockwave from that act cascaded across the soul system. Demons were thrown back into the warp. Traitor Legion forces on Terra felt the collapse of Chaos's favor simultaneously, the war turning in seconds because its architect wasn't just dead, but metaphysically erased. That framing, total obliteration of Horus Lupercal, soul and all, is what older editions established, and it's what most overview channels pull from without noting that newer primary sources complicate it. The Siege of Terra is a sub-series of the Horus Heresy bookline, published by Black Library. 8 novels closing out the longest science fiction series in modern publishing history. Aaron Dembski-Bowden's Echoes of Eternity is the 7th volume. Dan Abnett's The End and the Death is the 8th and final, The Terminus, published across 3 volumes, with the 3rd reaching readers in 2023. These are the texts most overview channels either completed before publication or haven't incorporated. The End and the Death, Volume 3, establishes something that creates real tension with the obliteration account. Horus has effectively killed the Emperor. The fight is functionally over, and in that moment, standing over what he's done, looking at the Emperor's ruined form, Horus experiences doubt. Something shifts. A being fully claimed by the Ruinous Powers, wholly committed to what the Chaos Gods made of him, does not have that moment. The older canon's logic for why obliteration was necessary rested on a specific premise, that Horus's soul was so completely corrupted, so thoroughly Chaos's property, that the gods could and would resurrect him from warp energy the way they've resurrected other favored champions. Lucius the Eternal regenerates inside anyone who takes pleasure in killing him. That's what full demonic claiming looks like in operational terms. Horus was supposed to be that dynamic at the largest possible scale. A soul capable of doubt in its final moments isn't a soul the Chaos Gods fully own. The text reportedly also frames the Emperor's final act in a register with nothing in common with cosmic obliteration. The description is intimate and humanistic. A father ending his son, a specific and very human act with a very human weight. That's a different metaphysical event than burning an essence from the warp so completely that no trace remains. The older framing required a specifically impersonal, total kind of destruction. The description that readers of the published volumes consistently identify is the opposite of impersonal. What the Siege of Terra series appears to have established is that Horus's soul status moved from definitively obliterated to something genuinely uncertain, dispersed into the warp rather than erased from it, possibly, which aren't the same outcome. Whether the Ruinous Powers could eventually reconstitute what remains is unresolved in the current timeline. Whether the doubt in his final moments means his soul is recoverable from Chaos's claim, or simply that the specific mechanism the older edition required no longer applies, isn't spelled out in the current setting. What's clear is that the question is alive in a way it wasn't before those novels were published. The Fabius Bile subplot in current M41 lore adds texture. Bile created soulless clones of Horus Lupercal, bodies with his genetics, explicitly stated as lacking his essence. That wouldn't function as a meaningful narrative distinction if the original soul were confirmed gone. The setting has positioned these pieces in ways that leave the door open. Whether anyone walks through its Games Workshop's decision, but the door is no longer bolted from the outside. That's the first major correction this video is here to make. There are at least 2 more things most Warhammer 40k overview videos present as settled fact about the Traitor Primarchs that are demonstrably wrong per current sources: the relationship between Konrad Curze and Chaos, and the current activity of Lorgar Aurelion. After those, the roster goes deeper. Konrad Curze is the most consistently miscategorized Traitor Primarch in the hobby. He appears alongside Lorgar, Fulgrim, and Magnus in overview coverage as a Primarch who fell to Chaos. That categorization is wrong, and the distinction matters more in this setting than it would in almost any other fictional universe, because in Warhammer 40,000, the mechanism of corruption is everything. He was the Primarch of the 8th Legion, the Night Lords. He committed acts during the heresy and before it that sit at the extreme end of what the setting considers horrific. The Night Lords' entire mode of warfare was engineered around terror as a weapon. Mass civilian atrocity, psychological destabilization, the careful manufacturing of absolute dread in populations they were supposed to be bringing into imperial compliance. His legion was functionally criminal as a military force. None of that is chaos corruption. All of it's Konrad Curze operating exactly as his baseline requires. Every other Traitor Primarch has a chaos story at the center of their fall. Lorgar constructed an entire theology around the Ruinous Powers before the heresy formally began. Fulgrim was gradually hollowed out by a demon bound inside a weapon he recovered from an alien temple. Magnus bargained his soul for survival. Mortarion was systematically broken by sustained warp exposure. Angron was running on implanted pain before chaos formally claimed him. Each of those is a corruption story with a specific mechanism. A god, a weapon, a desperate bargain, a siege that lasted longer than a mortal frame could endure. Curze's trajectory has none of those mechanisms. His fall to rebellion doesn't have a chaos god at the center of it. It has prescience. Curze could see probable futures, consistently and without control. Not vague impressions, vivid, terrible specificity. He saw what would happen to people if they weren't governed by absolute fear, saw what would happen to himself, saw what the Imperium was building toward regardless of anyone's intentions. The cumulative weight of those visions didn't drive him toward any god. It drove him toward nihilistic certainty. Catastrophe is the only honest outcome. Fear is the only honest governance tool. And the difference between the Night Lords' terror campaigns and the Imperium's other enforcement mechanisms is that the Night Lords at least don't pretend otherwise. The Night Lords as a legion had no single chaos patron. They acknowledged the existence of the 4 ruinous powers without directing worship or seeking favor from any of them. No mark of Khorne, no gift from Tzeentch, no blessing from Nurgle, no excess-driven corruption from Slaanesh. Chaos existed, and the Night Lords operated within that reality the same way they operated within every other reality, opportunistically, violently, on their own terms, answering to nothing outside themselves. His homeworld of Nostromo tells the whole story in compressed form. Curze governed it through theatrical horror, executions public and extreme, punishment calibrated for maximum psychological impact, crime rates dropping to functionally zero because the population was too frightened to act. When he left for the Great Crusade, the deterrent left with him. Nostromo reverted almost immediately. In 984 M30, following the Shiro compliance campaign, the Night Lords themselves destroyed it, destabilizing their own homeworld's core, ending the planet Curze's decades of terror governance had shaped. His response wasn't to reconsider the methods, it was to generalize them. If fear works on a city, apply it to a star system. If it works on a star system, apply it to a sector. The logic didn't collapse when Nostromo died, it expanded. His alignment with Horus during the heresy wasn't theological. The War Master offered him the most effective available path to a galaxy-wide campaign of terror and judgment, and Curze took it. The Chaos Gods gained nothing from that arrangement because Curze didn't bring anything to the table that required their involvement. He was already doing what the setting's darkest corners look like. His death is where everything about him converges. An imperial assassin, M'Shen, came for him. She came in darkness, which is where Curze always operated. He didn't fight back. He'd seen this moment in his visions for years, had known exactly what was coming, and from whom. When M'Shen arrived, the Night Haunter stood still and allowed it to happen. His final question to the darkness was whether his life had been justice or merely murder. He left it unanswered, because answering it would require believing existence trends toward something. He had never believed that. No ascension. No Daemon Prince Curze brooding in the Eye of Terror. No Night Haunter with cosmic power in reserve. He ended, completely. And that ending was the only one consistent with everything he believed about the universe. The Night Lords carry that specific emptiness forward. Their Primarch is gone with nothing waiting on the other side, which shapes how the 8th Legion operates differently from virtually every other traitor force in the current setting. They're not serving an agenda toward a Primarch's eventual return. They're not building toward anything divine. They're doing what they were shaped to do, without anyone to answer to, without instructions forthcoming. Overview coverage that lists Konrad Curze as a Primarch who fell to chaos doesn't just get a detail wrong. It misses what makes him the darkest figure in the heresy's entire cast, the fact that the worst actor in the room was doing it entirely by himself. Lorgar Aurelion, Primarch of the 17th Legion, the Word-Bearers, requires an honest acknowledgement that his current canonical status is genuinely contested between sources, and any overview video presenting it with confidence in either direction should show its work. The Lexicanum, which cites specific Black Library publications rather than aggregating community summaries, places Lorgar isolated within the Templum Inficio on the demon world of Sikaris, where he has remained for thousands of years, having forbidden anyone to disturb him. A Josh Reynolds novel, Apocalypse, set during the Indomitus Crusade in M42, builds its central conflict around Word-Bearers' leadership actively attempting to bring Lorgar out of that withdrawal. The fact that drawing the Primarch out of isolation is still an unresolved narrative question during the Indomitus Crusade era complicates any confident claim that he's currently leading the 17th Legion on active campaign. Some sources, reportedly including 8th edition Codex material, characterize him as moving toward active crusade. What's available here doesn't resolve the conflict cleanly, whether that Codex language represents a canonical update superseding the isolation framing or reflects in-universe Word-Bearers' aspiration rather than confirmed fact isn't clear from the sources at hand. The Word-Bearers themselves are among the most consistently active traitor legions in the current setting. Dark apostles spreading chaos theology through newly torn open regions of the galaxy. Possessed Marines forming the assault spearhead of the 17th Legion offensives. Demonic invocations converting contested systems into staging grounds for the Long War. Whether any of that is happening under direct Primarch leadership, or whether the Word-Bearers are prosecuting their crusade while Lorgar still sits in the Templum Inficio, is precisely what the sources don't resolve. Magnus the Red gets more sustained argument than any other traitor Primarch in the hobby, and that's not an accident. His story is the only one in the roster where the evidence for tragic victim and the evidence for architect of his own destruction are genuinely distributed enough that both positions hold simultaneous weight. His confirmed current status first, Demon Primarch of Tzeentch, operating from Sortiarius, the planet of sorcerers, his demon world within the Eye of Terror. The Thousand Suns are active, the Rubric Marines walk. Since the opening of the Great Rift, his stated intention, per established lore, is to succeed where the Emperor failed, to elevate humanity into a genuinely psychic species, to build the foundation for what the Imperium might have become if the Council of Nicaea had gone differently. He isn't passive. He isn't in hiding. He is engaged in one of the most grandiose projects in the current setting, prosecuting it in service of Tzeentch's ends, whether or not he characterizes his own agenda that way. The question of how he got there is what the lore refuses to simplify, and both sides of the debate deserve their strongest arguments. The case for tragic victim is built on real events. The emperor was constructing something beneath the imperial palace that almost no one outside a tiny inner circle was permitted to know about. A webway project, years in development, intended to give humanity access to the Eldar transportation network without the inherent dangers of warp travel. Navigators die. Ships are lost. The webway would have changed that at civilizational scale. The Emperor had poured an enormous psychic infrastructure into the construction, and the wards protecting it from demonic incursion were the most sophisticated psychic barriers he had ever built. Magnus, operating from Prospero, detected that Horus had turned against the Imperium. He needed to warn the Emperor. He used the most powerful psychic sending in his arsenal, a working proportional to what he was trying to convey, and sent it directly to Terra across the warp. The sending worked. The message arrived. The shockwave of that working tore through the psychic wards protecting the Emperor's webway project, allowing demonic entities to flood in through the breach. The project was permanently destroyed. The Emperor's most ambitious long-range plan for humanity's survival ended in the seconds it took Magnus's warning to cross the void. The Emperor's response was the burning of Prospero. Leman Russ and the Space Wolves descended on Magnus's homeworld alongside the Adeptus Custodes and the Sisters of Silence. The Emperor's original order was arrest, bringing Magnus to Terra in chains for judgment, not annihilating his legion and their homeworld. What Russ ultimately did was considerably more severe. Prospero burned. The Thousand Sons were destroyed as a military force. Magnus survived only by making a bargain with Tzeentch, pledging his soul for the preservation of himself and whatever remained of his sons. What Tzeentch returned was Sortiarius and the Rubric. Understanding the Rubric Marines is understanding what this bargain actually cost. They are thousands of Thousand Sons warriors whose souls were sealed inside their power armor during the Rubric of Ahriman, a desperate attempt by Magnus's chief sorcerer to save the Thousand Sons from the flesh change. Their bodies reduced to dust within the ceramite, their consciousness preserved, but permanently imprisoned, aware in whatever diminished way a consciousness sustained only by sorcerous binding can be aware, unable to leave the suits they inhabit. Sealed in ceramite coffins that walk and fight on command, for as long as Magnus directs them. They exist because Magnus tried to warn the Emperor, and the Imperium's response to that warning destroyed the legion Magnus was trying to protect. When people describe Magnus's story as heartbreaking, they're generally looking at those suits. The counter case is equally grounded in documented events, and it's just as strong. The Council of Nicaea was a formal imperial gathering convened specifically to address unsanctioned psychic practice among the Legiones Astartes. The Thousand Sons and Magnus were at the center of it. The council debated, examined the evidence, and produced explicit prohibitions. No legion-level sorcery, no unsanctioned psychic warfare in the field. The Primarchs accepted this. Magnus was directly in the room. He understood the edict better than almost anyone present, because the edict was substantially about his legion. He went home and continued practicing sorcery anyway. His justification, that his understanding was sufficient to manage what others couldn't, that the Emperor's prohibition was designed for lesser minds, was a position he had maintained consistently for decades. The webway breach wasn't a single catastrophic decision made under impossible pressure with no prior context. It was the predictable result of a Primarch who had spent his entire existence deciding his judgment superseded explicit instruction, that consequences others warned him about were consequences he personally could contain. He was wrong, catastrophically, at the worst possible moment. There is also what preceded the burning. Horus is believed to have communicated with Leman Russ before the attack, steering the outcome toward annihilation rather than the measured arrest the Emperor had ordered. The psychic breach Magnus caused gave Horus the political justification he needed to push Russ past the Emperor's intent. Without the breach, that justification is weaker. Magnus's act of trying to save the Emperor handed the War Master the instrument the War Master used to destroy him. One specific claim circulates widely in the community, that Russ attempted to contact Magnus directly before the attack, and Magnus didn't respond. That detail isn't confirmed in available sources at the level this video can stand behind, so it stays unverified here. What's confirmed is the larger architecture. Magnus's intentions were genuine. His arrogance was catastrophic and specifically enabled his enemies. The rubric Marines walk because a scholar who believed he was the most capable person in any room turned out to be wrong in the most permanent way available to the setting. He's Tzeentch's creature now, pursuing goals that are genuinely his own and being used toward ends that are genuinely the changer of ways. The Thousand Sons carry banners that remember a homeworld that no longer exists and a vision of humanity's potential that was destroyed by its own foremost advocate. Neither side of this debate gets to claim him cleanly. Both sides are right simultaneously, and the rubric Marines in their sealed armor are the reason neither side can ever close the argument. Fulgrim, Primarch of the Third Legion, the Emperor's Children, is the traitor Primarch most likely to be misrepresented in visual terms. His confirmed current form is a four-armed, serpentine Daemon Prince of Slaanesh who resides on a demon world called Kallax, believed to be within the Eye of Terror. Not a distorted humanoid, not a corrupted reflection of his former self with some added iconography. 4 arms and a serpentine lower body in place of legs, something that started as the most aesthetically refined of all the Primarchs and pushed that quality through Slaanesh's domain so far that it arrived somewhere genuinely inhuman. The Emperor's Children at their pre-heresy peak were the most precisely disciplined of all the Legiones Astartes, perfectionist in battle doctrine, in ceremony, in the cultivation of excellence in every measurable form. Slaanesh's operation is to take that drive toward perfection and push it through excess until the original virtue becomes unrecognizable. The Demon Primarch on Kallax is the endpoint of that process made manifest. The mechanism runs through the blade of the lair. During the campaign to bring the alien lair into Imperial compliance, Fulgrim discovered a weapon in the Lair Temple complex, the Blade of the Lair, a Chaos Demon weapon, though he didn't recognize it as such when he took it. It was extraordinary. That was the first mechanism. It appealed directly to the part of Fulgrim's psychology most accessible to corruption, the part that recognized and was powerfully drawn to perfection. He carried it. Graham McNeil's novel Fulgrim establishes what was inside it, a demon bound within the blade, not dormant but patient, specifically designed to corrupt the bearer by amplifying existing drives without appearing to do anything at all. The corruption worked through qualities Fulgrim already possessed, which made it invisible. His perfectionism became compulsion. His sensitivity to beauty and excellence became intolerance of any imperfection, in any form, at any scale. His tendency to push every experience toward its limit became something with no limit recognizable to a human mind. The demon worked slowly and thoroughly, and at some point crossed a threshold. It displaced Fulgrim's consciousness entirely into the blade itself. The entity committing atrocities at Istvan III, ordering the mass murder of loyalist Astartes from multiple legions, triggering the drop site massacre that would kill tens of thousands of Space Marines in a single campaign, wasn't Fulgrim. His consciousness was present in the weapon, watching it happen, without the means to stop any of it. Every act attributed to Fulgrim during that period occurred using his body, his voice, his face, his authority, while the actual Primarch observed from a prison made of his own favored blade. The Reflection Cracked, a short story also by McNeil, adds the chapter most overview coverage skips entirely. Fulgrim fights back and reclaims his body. The demon is expelled. The entity that subsequently ascended to demon princeship under Slaanesh's formal favor, the four-armed serpent currently on Kallax, is therefore genuinely Fulgrim, not an imposter wearing his face. The soul in the blade question remains a live discussion because the reclamation doesn't restore anything. The acts committed by his body while the demon occupied it still happened. The path towards Slaaneish's full favor was already walked and can't be unwalked. When Fulgrim reclaimed himself, he reclaimed a being already shaped by everything that occurred in his absence. And the lore's consistent characterization is that he didn't resist what he found. He embraced it. The four-armed serpent on Calyx chose what it became after the reclamation, not during the possession. That distinction is the thing most coverage loses. The Layer Blade story isn't simply a possession narrative ending in chaos servitude. The possession was a prelude. The genuine Fulgrim had time, after reclaiming himself, to examine what his body had become and what his legion had become, and he found it sufficient. That specific horror, the willing embrace of what was done without your consent, is more particular and more disturbing than the possession alone. Mortarion, Primarch of the 14th Legion, the Death Guard, is the demon Primarch whose coverage most consistently misframes his relationship with his patron god, always in the same direction. His confirmed current status: active, in the M41 to M42 setting, operating from the Plague Planet in the Eye of Terror, sending the Death Guard into the Materium with the methodical, grinding persistence that has defined the 14th Legion since the Heresy. He was present at the Siege of Terra. The Death Guard's campaigns are ongoing. None of that is contested. The character of his relationship with Nurgle is what coverage consistently flattens. He is presented as Nurgle's champion. The correct framing is that Mortarion was Nurgle's target. Those aren't the same relationship, and the difference is the entire point of his character. Mortarion didn't choose Nurgle because the Plague God's domain matched his psychology, the way Angron's relationship with Khorne has a certain terrible internal logic, or the way Lorgar's devotion to the Ruinous Powers is ideological from inception. His fall came during the Death Guard fleet's warp voyage during the Heresy. The fleet became becalmed in the warp, caught in the Immaterium with no navigational solution, unable to exit. For a duration, the warp's timelessness made genuinely immeasurable. The warp pressed on them. Specific plagues targeted the Death Guard. This is the detail that changes everything, and most coverage skips it. The Death Guard were among the hardiest of all the Legiones Astartes. Their genetics specifically engineered for resistance to toxins, to biological warfare, to disease in every natural form. The 14th Legion was built to endure what would kill anyone else. What killed them during that warp becalming wasn't natural. Nurgle's specific gift to the Death Guard was a set of plagues purpose-built to defeat the physiology they were designed to find, engineered to exploit the specific vulnerabilities in enhanced Astartes biology that ordinarily wouldn't matter, that even their enhanced immune systems couldn't address quickly enough. Space Marines, who could survive battlefields that would kill any unaugmented human, were dying of targeted biological warfare in the dark of the warp, while their fleet drifted and their Primarch watched. Mortarion was the last to break. His legion's resilience was his pride, the central fact of his identity, the thing that distinguished the Death Guard from every other fighting force in the Imperium. That resilience was being surgically negated around him, and he couldn't stop any of it. The Plague God didn't send diseases that would simply kill the Death Guard quickly. He sent diseases calibrated to make them suffer specifically, in the terms that would cost Mortarion most. When Mortarion finally submitted, when he offered himself to Nurgle in exchange for relief for his legion, it wasn't a powerful man choosing a patron. It was a man who had watched everyone under his command suffer indefinitely in darkness, until saying whatever his tormentor required was the only way to make it stop. Nurgle's character as a chaos god operates on exactly this mechanism in established lore: grotesque paternal affection, afflicting what he loves with what he creates, offering relief only he can provide for suffering only he caused. The relationship engineered from the beginning to create dependency and then claim whatever submits as devoted family. Mortarion is the clearest single illustration of that dynamic in the entire Primarch roster, which is probably why his lore registers differently than the others when it's handled with care. He's not a champion. He's the most complete available demonstration of what Nurgle's love looks like from the inside. His current activity: cold, methodical, inexorable, reflects a man who survived the warp becalming and has been executing Nurgle's campaigns every day since without the option of stopping. The Death Guard's grinding advance isn't enthusiasm, it's endurance applied to a purpose Mortarion can't refuse. Coverage that calls him Nurgle's willing servant misses the specific texture of what the Plague God built and what it cost to build it. Two brief current status entries for the Traitor Primarchs whose overview treatment is broadly accurate. Angron, Primarch of the 12th Legion, the World Eaters. He returned to the Materium during the Arcs of Omen campaign, arriving aboard the Conqueror and gathering World Eaters' Chaos Lords around him immediately. He is the active Daemon Primarch of Khorne's most blood-committed legion in the current setting, and his ascension to Daemon Prince was the culmination of a process that predated the heresy. The Butcher's Nails, cortex implants driving perpetual pain and rage, were always the mechanism. Khorne claimed a man who was mostly his before the formal claiming happened. The World Eaters reflect that origin in everything they do. Perturabo, Primarch of the 4th Legion, the Iron Warriors. Following the heresy, he ascended to Daemon Prince of Chaos Undivided, no single patron god, allegiance to chaos as a totality rather than to any of the 4 ruinous powers specifically. His demon world is in the Eye of Terror. The Iron Warriors remain an active Traitor Legion force. His status hasn't been materially revised by recent publications in ways that affect the basic overview. His outlines are what standard coverage says they are. Alpharius Omegon and the Alpha Legion close this video, and they have to close it on an open question because the entire architecture of the Alpha Legion's lore is built to prevent any other kind of ending. The established facts first. Alpharius and Omegon were co-equal Primarchs of the 20th Legion, the Alpha Legion, 2 distinct individuals sharing a single identity. Alpharius as the public face of the Legion, and Omegon as the shadow half of the same command structure. Every Alpha Legion legionnaire could claim to be Alpharius. Rank was deliberately indeterminate. Unit designations were interchangeable. The deception wasn't a layer the 22nd Legion applied to their operations. It was the operational architecture of the 20th Legion. The most robust method of running a long-term covert operation across a time frame measured in millennia is to build an organization where the structure itself prevents anyone captured from knowing enough to compromise the whole. Alpharius is dead. Rogel Dorn killed him, an account established in John French's Praetorian of Dorn. Some sources attribute a separate killing of a figure presenting as Alpharius to Rabute Guilliman, and the lore community's reading of these two accounts is that Dorn's kill was the genuine article, while Guilliman's target was possibly Omegon, possibly an impersonator. These aren't the same death and shouldn't be conflated. Omegon's current status is unresolved. Whether he is alive and operating under a different identity, whether the individual Guilliman killed was Omegon ending the other half of their shared command, whether Omegon is active anywhere the current setting acknowledges. All of that is deliberately left open. Not open through narrative oversight, open by design. The canonical basis for the Alpha Legion's ambiguous true loyalty lives in Dan Abnett's Legion, the Cabal, an ancient organization of alien and human agents capable of projecting probable futures far further downstream than any human psyker could manage, made a specific and documented argument to Alpharius Omegon. Their analysis showed 2 futures with different endpoint destruction. A loyalist victory in the heresy extends the long war for millions of years, and attrition chaos eventually wins anyway through total consumption of everything that could sustain humanity. A chaos victory in the short term collapses under its own weight. The ruinous powers need a living, populated materium to corrupt and feed on, and if they destroy enough of it fighting over it, there isn't enough left to sustain them. The Cabal's argument: the only path to ultimately defeating chaos was to let chaos win in the near term, absorb the catastrophic loss, and trust that what remained would be enough to survive what followed. Alpharius Omegon heard that argument, Legion establishes that they sided with Horus. What Legion does not establish is whether they believed the Cabal. Whether the decision was genuine conviction, strategic acceptance of a calculation they found persuasive, or a performance directed at alien seers who might be useful to have in their debt, the text doesn't state. The Alpha Legion built themselves specifically to make that verification impossible, and that applies to the verification of their own founding decision as much as to anything else. The post-heresy record doesn't clarify the picture. Alpha Legion warbands have been documented engaging Chaos forces rather than fighting alongside them. Their cells are embedded in imperial institutions, in Chaos warbands, in independent factions that don't know they're hosting operatives from the XX Legion. There is no recoverable central command directing the Alpha Legion toward a single legible purpose, because a cell structure designed to survive 10,000 years of interrogation requires that no cell below a certain internal clearance knows what the operation actually is. Individual operatives can be captured, broken, extracted down to the last secret they possess, and still not compromise the full architecture, because they genuinely don't know it. That's not a security gap, that's the security model. The longest con theory, that the Alpha Legion has maintained the appearance of Chaos allegiance for 10 millennia while positioning for a betrayal of the Ruinous Powers that hasn't happened yet, isn't confirmed by any single source stating it plainly as settled canon. What it's supported by is the accumulated weight of lore decisions that are genuinely difficult to explain any other way. Legion exists. The Cabal's argument exists. The documented Alpha Legion engagements against Chaos forces exist. Omegon's unresolved status exists. The cell structure, architecturally designed to prevent internal verification of the operation's true direction, exists. The theory isn't proven. It's the most coherent reading of everything available, which is a different claim, but not a weaker one. If the Cabal's calculation was correct, every action the Alpha Legion has taken for 10,000 years is the same operation. The heresy was the opening move. Maintaining Chaos allegiance was maintenance. The betrayal, if it exists anywhere in the original planning, hasn't happened yet. The Chaos gods they've been nominally serving all this time don't know it's coming, because the XX Legion built a legion where not knowing is structural, where the question of true loyalty is architecturally unanswerable from inside the organization itself. The Imperium doesn't know which side they're on. The Chaos gods don't know. Individual Alpha Legion cells embedded across both factions may genuinely not know, because that's how you build something that survives interrogation across a time frame measured in thousands of years. If the betrayal is real, nobody will know until it's already over. And if it isn't real, if the Cabal was wrong, or Alpharius Omegon rejected the calculation after presenting it back to the seers with apparent acceptance, or the longest con in Warhammer 40,000 history was pulled on the people who believed they were watching it unfold, then the Alpha Legion has been exactly what the Chaos gods think they are for 10,000 years, and the theory is the most elaborate red herring the setting ever produced. Either way, the Alpha Legion wins the argument by making it impossible to settle. Subscribe for more lore corrections like this one.